Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I've recorded anything or uploaded anything onto YouTube, so I'm going to treat the intro almost like a little mini vlog real quick. Even though most of the people watching know me online anyway, they know I didn't disappear or anything, but just for the like 3 or 4 people who only know me through YouTube, just school started back up. I'm a teacher. I got a little busy, kind of stopped reading there, and turns out in September I got COVID and it wasn't really that fun. Shocker, I know. But it left me feeling awful for 2 straight weeks, and then it took me another 2 weeks to catch up on work. But October I started bouncing back with my reading habits, and I'm hoping to carry forward some momentum in November to not necessarily pick up the pace, because it's not always about the numbers when it comes to reading, but just enjoy books and enjoy reading a little bit more, because I was feeling a little run down in September and the early part of October, but I think I'm doing a lot better now. I do think, if once I look back at this year in terms of reading, that the what's the word I'm looking for? But this whole idea of how the first half of the year was really strong when it came to reading. I was reading 4-star books, 5-star books, back to back to back, like the first 4 months. I read some of my all-time favorite books now. And I really wish I was recording all year. And then the latter half of the year, it's been kind of a slog with mainly books that I just felt kind of neutral on, or even negative on, even though my least favorite book of the year was at the beginning of the year. But other than that, the year can be split into two. And we're going to talk about a book that kind of continues that trend, unfortunately. But funnily enough, I almost predicted it, that this would be the case, because of my experience with the author. Because today we're going to talk about, let me grab the book, Starter Villain by John Scalzi. I love the cover. That's really why I picked it up, because on my bookshelf we have different themes for the different rows on our shelf, and one of our themes is, they're books all about cats or cats on the cover. One day I might show it. But this is my third John Scalzi book, and much like how my year is split into two distinct patterns of great reading and not so great reading, John Scalzi books and the reads so far, from my experience, are hit or miss. We're going to talk about why that is with Starter Villain in a little bit. But again, this is my third John Scalzi book. My first book from his that I read was Kaiju Preservation Society, and I do not, want to be a negative Nancy or anything like that, but no hyperbole involved. But it was one of my least favorite books of all time. I would consider it a pretty bad novel, and I think a number of people that I trust online also believe it was a pretty bad novel. So I feel a lot better about that. But then my second novel that I read by Scalzi was Old Man's War, his most famous work. I think it's the one that really made him jump into the stratosphere of fame for sci-fi, modern sci-fi, before he wrote Red Shirts, I think in 2012. But Old Man's War, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was just enjoyable. Can't really use different adjectives apparently, but it was a lot of fun. I laughed a lot during that novel, and I really enjoyed the protagonist during that novel. Starter Villain, I kind of again predicted that it might fall in between those two, because I don't think there are a lot of novels worse than Kaiju Preservation Society, and it did fall kind of neutral between those two, but I do lean more negative with Starter Villain than I had originally hoped and planned. And really, when I was reading the first 40 pages, I thought I was going to be a lot more positive, but the book kind of falls apart. And I'm going to talk about why that is right now. Let's start with the positives. So one of the first positives I want to talk about, actually before I even get into the positives, this is both a positive and let's talk about what the book is about, right? You need to know the premise. Starter Villain is going to follow a 30-something-year-old man named Charlie. I don't remember his last name. I'm not the best with names when it comes to novels. But he is in his 30s, and he is kind of on hard times with his life. He was recently divorced. He lost his father pretty recently as well, before the start of the novel. And he is estranged from his step siblings. And he is living alone in a house left to him by his father. Really, to all his father left it to all of his siblings, he and all of his siblings. But he doesn't really have a job anymore either. He works as a substitute teacher at times, but he lost his job. I think it was even explained due to the pandemic. I think it's set obviously in our world, and I think it does follow post-pandemic timeline. One day, he gets a message that his uncle has passed away. And one thing that's very special about his uncle is that his uncle is filthy, stinking rich. And he knew that, but he didn't really have a lot of contact with his uncle. So he was very surprised to get the message. And, later he was invited to show up to his uncle's funeral, even though they haven't spoken in years, I believe since he was like 3 or 4 years old. That's the best to my knowledge. And while at the funeral, some crazy hijinks happen. I'm not going to say what, because that is a minor spoiler, and I think that is one of the better parts of the novel. I want readers to experience that. But after the funeral, and this is in the dust jacket, this isn't a spoiler, he is offered a chance to inherit and run his uncle's business. And what is so special about his uncle's business is the fact that his uncle is not just a wealthy businessman, but he is one of the world's most renowned supervillains. And I just want to say that, again, that is a major positive. I found the premise so original and so entertaining. I bought the book again, mainly for the book cover, because I love cats. I have my own cats, 4 of them. Oops. But also the premise drew me in. And I think if that sounds like an interesting plot line, I think you should check out this book. It really does focus on that, the entire novel. This is a great, at times, standard fish out of water story where Charlie has to navigate this new world about what it means to be a supervillain. He is trained by his uncle's assistants, his former assistants now that he's dead, and his coworkers and his researchers, his team of scientists. And Charlie has to try to really, make a name for himself and really protect his uncle's interests. Because he is going to be flanked on all sides by other supervillains and government agencies and world politics and the world economics. It's all going to surround Charlie, and he has to deal with this new life. And I do think that is interesting. I did find that a strong suit for this story. Again, I love fish out of water stories where we get to learn with the character as well. So if you are interested in the premise, I would check it out just for that. Major positive for me. Another positive that I want to talk about is, again, I was struggling for about a month and a half with my reading. This book is very easy to read, all right? And not to downplay the other books that I tried to read or finished reading. Not that they were too difficult, but I think maybe COVID messed my brain up a little bit more than I thought. But this book was refreshing, I would say. It was a breeze, easy to understand, no difficulty there. And I think some people might think that's a negative, and they're free to believe that. But for me, that did make it a little bit more enjoyable. I read this in 3 days. You could probably easily read this in one sitting. Well, if you had 8 hours, maybe not one sitting, but one day. You could probably read this in one day if you just took a Saturday off or whatever day you have off from work to finish this book. And I do find that, again, a good positive. I needed something refreshing. This is, I've seen it tossed around a lot online. I don't know if I like using this word to describe a novel, because I do think that sometimes people use this word to defend kind of bad novels, but this book was cozy. I'll give it that. It was something that I could easily sit in my bed and read with the covers drawn up, and I had fun. It was a good, nice and easy popcorn read. Nothing too difficult, nothing too extreme. It was easy. I don't know what else to say about that. It was a lot of fun. I would say that Charlie himself, I want to speak about Charlie going back to our protagonist. Charlie was very relatable. Again, he's in his 30s. I'm in my 30s. Maybe he's feeling a little bit of he's at a dead end. I don't necessarily feel the same way, but life can be sometimes very hard to navigate, and Charlie does have that going on as well. Maybe he doesn't know exactly what he wants to do with his future, and that's same with me. Same way with me. John Scalzi does a pretty good job with that. I think he's pretty good at writing his characters where they are at a place in their life where maybe they're not experts at what they want, and it's relatable. If you have the same issues or the same feelings, you might also enjoy Charlie for that. Another positive while I'm thinking about this, going back to the fun aspect, if you like talking cats and talking dolphins and other weird technologies, you might like this. There is some sciencey stuff going on with this because he does have a team of scientists working with him to create new and powerful technology so that his business as a supervillain can continue to run and operate successfully. So that stuff was a lot of fun as well. I will say the cats were probably the best part. Not to be, all in for the cats, but really that's why I got the book. If you like cats, please pick up this book. Other than that, I think some minor positives. I do think the characters were, other than Charlie, I think a lot of the characters did. They were all right. They were fun. Nothing too powerfully written, I'll be honest. I might talk about that with my negatives, but the characters, they were fine. I didn't really have too many issues with them. I did have an issue with how they were written, though, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But overall, I think the positives were, they were all right. Again, I'm pretty neutral on the book, but I am going to talk about some negatives in a little bit. So let's get right on to the negatives because I wasn't entirely positive about this book, and I do believe that this book has some major flaws, and we'll get into that right now. So some of the negatives or flaws. I feel like my chair is going to break at any moment. I tightened it earlier. If you hear the squeaking, I shouldn't lean too far back. But some negatives about Starter Villain. I recently just watched the Fantasy Network, and Jared Henderson, I'm subscribed to him, but again, bad with names. They just had a live stream where, randomly and by complete coincidence, I didn't plan on reading. I read Starter Villain like almost a month ago at the time of recording this. Randomly, they actually talked about John Scalzi. I think Jared brought him up and his issues with Scalzi. And unfortunately, the issues that were brought up during that live stream are very apparent in here. And the number one issue being that I do believe that John Scalzi is a very intelligent person, very likable person, but I do not believe he trusts in his audience at all. I do believe that he downplays his readers' intelligence, especially with how he writes his characters and how he works with characterization. All of his characters are very direct. We know that this person is a bad person because Scalzi says so. We know that this person is an uppity business person because Scalzi says so. We know that this person is a good person and we need to understand him because Scalzi says so. There's really not a whole lot of room for interpretation in this book when it comes to characters. And I really focus on that because for those of you who don't know, I am an English teacher, a middle school English teacher, and we are going to talk about, with my students, direct versus indirect characterization pretty soon. And this book is pretty much all direct characterization. The characters are pretty flat because of that, and they're not really fleshed out because of that, and I don't really feel like a lot of them had motivations. Charlie had a motivation as to why he wanted this business to succeed. It's because, part of a deal where if he ran his uncle's business for a little bit, he would get money to help him buy a bar, and he thought that was his life's purpose, his life's dream. And that was really it. Nothing else from any of the other characters. We are kind of left in the dark with them, except, of course, the bad guys. We're told that they want bad things to happen because they want money. I can't think of another word besides lame. Very lame motivations. And that did bother me, and I do think that is not just a small negative, but a very major flaw for this book. I think if you mess up with your characterization, it really does mess with the whole story. And I did think with Starter Villain, it did share a lot of those characteristics with Kaiju Preservation Society, where the characters were very boring a lot of times. Even though I guess my positives, I did say they were okay. I'm kind of changing my mind while I'm recording this, and that's okay. I do also want to say, speaking of characters, I do think Scalzi runs into this issue with a lot of his books. I do think he can be funny at times. And comedy is so difficult to write because not everybody has the same sense of humor. Go figure, right? But Scalzi, he likes his characters to have quips, witty one-liners. But I have found in my experience with reading that if all of your characters are witty and they like to use quips, well, then none of your characters are witty because they begin to sound the same. And I think Scalzi did struggle with voice and tone in this book, right? There are no distinct voices, even with Charlie. Speaking of Charlie, another major flaw, and again, this is why I lean more towards, negative instead of neutral, because while there are plenty of positives, I think the flaws are huge, and I think they are mistakes in the writing. This is supposed to be a fish out of water story, but I don't really get that with Charlie. Charlie quickly becomes an expert, almost, in his fields, and he just has these moments in the novel, and this really does happen, where he has huge speeches to his, to the people who are opposing him, and it's like he figures out all of their plans, and he has these great moments where he's like, and I know exactly what you're doing, and here's how I would do it, and it felt wrong. It didn't feel very much earned, as a character moment. It just felt like, oh, okay, Charlie is a really intelligent person, because John Scalzi is he's an intelligent person, and it didn't feel natural at all for Charlie as a character, or for the story, for the plot as well. And that really beats up on the plot line. Interesting premise, not executed all that well. And then another, I don't want to say this is a major flaw because this is different for everybody, but one thing that I noticed while reading this, I don't want to sound like a literary snob or anything like that, but I like to try to take something out of the books that I'm reading, whether that be entertainment or, some great themes. Themes could really be anything. I just want to, I want a novel to kind of teach me what it means to be a human, right? A lot of times. And this book, in all honesty, I've been really trying to understand, what is this book trying to say? And that sounds really harsh, and I don't mean it to be, but truthfully, I didn't really get anything from this book except some laughs, and it was fun. And while that is okay, especially, again, I hate saying cozy novels because it's used as a term sometimes to defend bad books, but it's okay to be cozy. But I really feel like there wasn't a whole lot going on in this novel. I don't feel like it is really elevated to anything special. If you want to read it just for fun, go ahead. Again, it is fun at times. But that is something that I did notice, and it did bother me because while it was a refreshing read, at the end of the day, felt like I was eating a piece of cake and, I need some protein. Right? All I ate that day was a piece of cake, and now I'm feeling very faint. Needed something a little bit more. And then lastly, a major flaw, and I think this is really the biggest one that made me lean kind of negative, and that's the ending. I'm not going to speak about what happens in the ending because that's for the readers to find out, but in my mind, the ending completely invalidates the entire story. Again, with the themes, I felt like there wasn't really a whole lot going on. There wasn't really a whole purpose to this novel, and that feeling was at its strongest. Oh, cats are getting at it. That feeling was at its strongest at the end, where it really felt like Charlie lacks agency. We find out at the end that throughout the entire novel, Charlie had no agency, and there were players moving him along like a puppet, and he was reset down to the base root. he ends his story really the way it began. And I felt like all the growth that I thought he was going through was all for nothing at the end of the novel. And I think that is a major weakness for this story. I have seen some people talking about it, but this book is generally getting positive reviews. And it's okay if I'm a little negative. I could be different than from other readers, but I didn't get the ending. It fell very flat for me because it's supposed to be this grand explosion of so many things, right? And then it just ends the way we began. And I didn't like that for Charlie. I feel like his journey was all for nothing. So to wrap it all up, I don't know how long I've been recording. Hopefully not too long. I do think this novel had promise. It's not bad like Kaiju Preservation Society, but it's not great like Old Man's War. So it does fall right in the middle like I thought. But I do lean a little bit more towards the negative. When I finished reading this book, I gave it 3 stars. It was one of my lower rated 3 stars. I wouldn't really hesitate to give it 2 stars, to be completely honest with you. In fact, this is my second time recording this review, and I was really negative the first time, but I slept on that review, and I decided to re-record, and I think I am a little bit more positive because I began to think, I don't really want to say those things. I can see I can see the good in this book a little bit better after sleeping on it. But overall, this is probably going to be my final Scalzi book. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be too interested in his writing anymore because I do think, from what I can tell, and from what people are saying, his books are beginning to sound a lot alike. So unless his next book is universally loved, but not only universally loved, but loved by people I trust, this is probably it. I'm probably off of the Scalzi ride. But thank you for watching all this. Hopefully this review is, it makes sense, and hopefully you enjoyed it. I'm going to stop saying when I'm going to see you next because who knows. But I am recording pretty soon after this because I finished 3 novels, and I do want to talk about one more of them. But I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Peace.